Today, we explore how curiosity and a good question can open unexpected doors. I'm speaking with Laurence Minsky, who turned his early questions about advertising portfolios into a book deal. That book launched both his advertising career and an unexpected path into academia. What stands out about Lawrence's story is his approach. He starts with questions that intrigue him, finds great collaborators, and creates content that moves conversations forward. From audio branding to AI and marketing, his work shows how curiosity helps spot emerging trends. I'm Bill Sherman. You're listening to Leveraging Thought Leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Welcome to the show, Laurence.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, as we dive in, I want to focus on your journey from a marketing and advertising practitioner into the world of academia, thought leadership, and how some of the work in thought leadership opened doors for you that you didn't necessarily anticipate nor expect. And I want to begin with the story of your first book, How to Succeed in Advertising. So can you tell us about when that book project started and how you pitched it? Because there's a fascinating story there.
Yeah, exact dates I can't tell, but I can tell you it was at the beginning of my career when I was working at an in-house ad agency. The way I got the job at an in-house agency was I took a writing test, and that was the old school way of doing things that had long gone out of practice when I was in the industry, but I hit upon a place that still used it. The practice of the time and still today is having a portfolio of samples of made up work and showing that around and showing what you can do when you wanted to be a copywriter or an art director. So I was struggling with my portfolio because I knew I wanted to switch over to a mainstream ad agency, and as opposed to just working in one vertical for the rest of my career. And I was struggling with my portfolio, and I did get a little bit of freelance on the side and stuff like that from while I was working at the publisher. And I was talking to an account executive, Emily Calvo, who also wanted to switch over to advertising. And we were saying, I said, I wonder what the beginning portfolios look like of all these great ad people. And she said, yeah. And we got and said somebody should write a book about it. And then I said, why don't we write the book about it? And so we wrote a letter to a publisher, and the publisher wrote back and said, we love your concept, but you need a proposal. And we wrote back, what's a proposal? And they sent us an outline for a proposal, put the proposal together, sent it to them. They said, we love your proposal, but you really need a sample chapter to show that you can write. And we said, okay. And we found somebody. It was, we looked at the careers of 13 top creative directors back then. And we found somebody, a creative director who is well known on the national stage in the industry. And she said yes, but she kept postponing our meeting to interview her to write the chapter. And the day that we finally were able to show up at her office, we get a phone call and say, we're going to give you a contract anyways. And Emily, account executive, said, we're going to have some expenses. And they gave us an advance as well. So they did have some stipulations that we get certain people on the book, which we did. And the book was greatly reviewed, accepted, and read at the time.
So I want to underline a few things here that are important, at least to me in this story. Number one, you were at a relatively junior point in your career, right?
Yes. The ironic thing was How to Succeed in Advertising When All You Have Is Talent was the full title. We had that little twist on it. The publisher said we could have any title as long as it had how to in it and the word advertising. And essentially, I worked in an in-house agency, which in the industry of big consumer brands, you didn't work in anything. So I was the junior of the juniors writing a book on how to succeed in an industry and in an environment I'd never worked in. And while I was interviewing people, one of the people I interviewed, who's president of a major ad agency, invited me back. And when he heard that I was trying to break into the industry, he said, "Bring in your portfolio." And so basically, he taught me how to put a portfolio together. And just listening to how they broke in and how they built their career and all that gave me all these strategies to break in and have a career. So I was writing this without the experience of living it.
And a couple pieces that I want to additionally underline on that is many people will give the advice of go do interviews for the job that you want to have or senior and ask for that interview of what is the job like and use it as a learning and also possibly a door opening tool. You came with a book proposal that had been accepted and came with a different twist on that, right? It was something that I would assume for many of those established and eminent advertising individuals was intriguing. Hey, they want to shine the spotlight on me, right? And they're coming with something. Yeah, I'll do that interview. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, they're the star. People read the book and they said, "Where am I?" As the author, I removed myself from that. The book went through 2 editions. The first one was with, Emily. The second one I did on my own where and expanded it to 18 people. And it was really each chapter was about the individual. It wasn't about me. So I really focused on that. And, it's become in many ways the blueprint for a lot of my writing in that I find an area that I wanna learn more about, and then I get myself a book contract, and I have to go write it, and that forces me to, learn about it in a
Right,
way.
we'll go there, right? Because the last point that I want to distill is even though you didn't have the experience in-house, you didn't necessarily have the network for advertising executives, but you had a really good idea based on a gap in the conversation of, "Hey, I wonder what these folks' early portfolios looked like. How do we talk about that?" And a good idea can create an opportunity, even if you're junior, you don't have the right background, etc. And so this fits into the thought leadership of the curious mind with a really good question can create momentum. Let's talk about a couple of your other books. I know you have focused on audio. I know you've taken interest in other areas. Expand on how this has become the model for many of your books.
So, I have a formula now in a sense, and I sort of fell on the formula in that I try to write an article or 2 about the topic before I would write a book to see if there's interest, response, and just can I sustain more than, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 pages, depending on how long the article is. So that would be my first step is that. Then it's really finding topics that interest me, and I might not necessarily know much about them. And I collaborate. I work with a guy who always talked about creating geniuses. You bring 2 people together that have different skill sets and knowledge, and you stick them in a room, and they'll create something greater than the sum of the 2 of them. And that is what I would do is I would find people who had some knowledge of the area or some passion for the area and collaborate with them. So most of my books have been co-written, and it's a way of learning. It's a way of discovering. And by the time it's published, I know enough about the topic to be comfortable with it. So it's been my formula since starting with about I have a book called The Activation Imperative, and I wrote it with a guy named William Rosen, and he approached me about that topic. And that's about when that formula fell into place. Before that, I wrote some textbooks and some other career kind of books. And since then, I followed that formula. I did that, and then a book on audio branding, the use of sound to build your brand. And I partnered with the U.S. managing director of the world's largest audio branding firm. And so I learned a lot about audio branding, and the company was gracious to open their files. So we had all their case studies. It's headquartered in Paris. And then I went and did a book on global brand management, and I partnered with somebody else who my publisher was British. I had the topic. We talked about it, and they said they'll give me the contract as long as I have somebody not from the US as my co-author. So they wanted the global perspective. And he lives in the US, Alan Geva, but he's worked all over the world. And so we were able to combine our perspectives on that. And from there, the most recent book is on voice marketing. And that's the use of conversational AI in marketing practices. It's not as adopted yet as it should be, but it does drive customer engagement. And so now, I'm the author on that, or one of the co-authors.
And if we trace that line through the topics, and I think the 10 books you said you've
Mm.
published, there's a consistent theme of I'm really interested in this topic. I want to learn more. And G, there's a gap in the publication space. Let me go find someone and create a great book, right?
Exactly. And my most recent book, the voice marketing one on conversational AI, I had lunch with one of my former students. And he's been out of the industry. He's graduated about 10 years ago. And he was asking me, how was I able to predict that AI was going to be such a big topic? It came out shortly after ChatGPT came out.
Oh, that's perfect.
Perfect timing. And my response was, I didn't. It was just a topic that interested me. I actually put the proposal together with my editor from two of my books and at Kogan Page, and then she left the company. And Kogan, I'm sorry about calling them out, but they looked at the proposal and they rejected it because who's going to read a book about AI? It's not going to be a big enough topic. And I had to go find another publisher to publish it. And I went back to the one from the Activation Imperative, Roman and Littlefield, and they were all on it. And we were going to have a little bit longer of a runway for the book, but they cut a couple months off because of ChatGPT to get it out on the market. But it was something that interested me I didn't know anything about and knew that it was a thing. And lo and behold, I wrote a book on AI the year AI became on everyone's mind.
And that's fantastic. So, Lawrence, you mentioned former students, and I want to talk more about how this work as an author and the practice of thought leadership and advancing conversations led you to a career in academia. Because last we were talking about your career, we were, you wanting to go into advertising. How did you hop into academia and how did that door open? Because you didn't follow the traditional path, did you?
I did not. And again, it goes back to how to succeed in advertising. So I wrote the book. I put my portfolio together based on the knowledge of what I learned. Alternatively, the way most people did it is after you got your bachelor's degree, is you went to a portfolio school and all that and spent time on your portfolio. But I did it on my own, just using what I learned from the book. And it was good enough to get me a job at a small agency, which then got me a job at what was at the time the biggest and considered to be among the best agencies in the world at the time. And I don't remember when I think the book didn't come out until I was already at that agency. So, or right before it. So it was, I was able to merchandise what I learned and apply it myself. So I knew what I had was good. But while I was at the agency was a unique kind. Back then, it was doing brand marketing. And so it didn't do the traditional media advertising of the day. And we doubled in size the year after I was there, and then we doubled in size again. And they marketed themselves as having the biggest creative staff of its kind in the industry. We're doing brand marketing, and we did everything, a client needed, from in-store merchandising and signage to writing websites and digital and you name it. Thinking through future states of our clients. So somebody at the agency came up with an idea of let's do this program to train people how to become creatives for our industry, for our niche. And I helped with it and organized it. And then the agency was bought out, and a new president came in, a bean counter, and said, "Why do you have so many creatives here? Let's just use freelance." He didn't understand that we were, it was a specialty agency. It wasn't how you can do TV and radio and print. And so my job got cut, and I went to a headhunter. Oh, when I was getting cut, my boss said, "You did a good job on the teaching. You ought to teach," because I was working on the program at Frankel. And then I went to a headhunter, and the headhunter said the same thing. "You ought to teach." And yeah, right. I only have a bachelor's degree. Well, I can't do that. And the headhunter sent me over to Columbia College. She's told me to go see this guy, and I made an appointment with him. I walked in, had my portfolio because I didn't know how to interview for academia. And first thing I pulled out was my book. And he said, "You wrote that?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "When do you want to start?" And he hired me as an adjunct, which is a part-time faculty member where I had one class, and taught as an adjunct for a very brief period of time because I was at the right place at the right time, and they were looking to bring in a practitioner onto full-time staff because that's where the curriculum gets made. And so I applied. I went through the search committee interview process and all that. And lo and behold, I was on tenure track as with a bachelor's degree and got tenure. And now there's a rank system. So before tenure, you're assistant, and then you're associate once you have tenure. And then if once you're on a national level, you're a full professor. And so I applied for that, and now I'm a full professor. So it's all from walking in with that one book.
And even goes back to the first book that you wrote, right? If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave a 5-star review at ratethispodcast.com/LTL and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcasts and on all major listening apps, as well as thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So let's have a little bit broader conversation, because the way that you talk about thought leadership and the writing of books really seems like it has opened doors as well as created opportunities that wouldn't have happened, whether that's being hired into academia or getting the position in advertising. I'd love to hear your thoughts of, did you ever think you would be writing 10 books, and how really, as you look back, has the journey of thought leadership impacted your career?
Well, in college, I liked writing fiction and poetry and plays. So my dream was to write that. So writing 10 books was not out of the question. I never imagined I'd be writing 10 business books or more, which, because I'm working on a proposal for my next one right now.
Of course you are.
Yeah, of course. It's a machine. Once you get going, you got to keep going. So I, I never imagined I would end up in academia with a bachelor's. And, there's two ways of being qualified to teach. One is having the degree. The other is tested experience. All the accrediting bodies look at that. And so I have enough, tested experience because of my book. because of my consulting to do that. Now, I never was comfortable with the term thought leadership. I get it because that's an outside bestowed term. So I never think of myself as a thought leader to let other people determine whether I am or not. I do what I do to learn and to keep going and to satisfy my curiosity and to stay up on the skills that I need for my industry. So, I'm in advertising, I'm older for the industry. And, if
It's a young person's game, isn't it?
it really is a young person's game, if you're not in the top C-suite by in your 40s, you're looking for another career. And so I'm still working in the industry today. I have tons of clients working on national, international brands, recognized brands. And I think the two things that keep me relevant for the industry is one, my writing and staying up on all that stuff. Not necessarily that they read the books, but I'm conversant on it when I'm with clients. And two, on the other opposite end of the spectrum, my students keep me young. So I'm aware of all the trends. And so if I'm able to bring those two together, I stay relevant as a consultant.
I love that as an answer, right? And I want to circle back to something that you said. Thought leader, I agree with you, is someone's term that people tend to bestow or describe people who influence them. But at least from my mind, I make a distinction on the practice of thought leadership, much more like meditation or yoga. It's an ongoing set of skills that you're developing. It's a mindset and a commitment. Like you said, once you're at book 10, it's much like a bicycle. You keep pedaling, right? What I see if I look externally from career is a curiosity, questioning, and then a desire to find and share answers. That is looking around the corner, seeing what's next, and coming back. And the book on AI is one example of that. If you hadn't had as many conversations as you had and asked as many questions as you did, you might not have written that book. Now, sometimes dumb luck also happens and lightning strikes, but being engaged both in the community of practice and, like you said, with your students gives you a better chance at standing in that intersection where lightning strikes.
Yeah, academics are supposed to be researching and writing and doing all that kind of stuff too. And but the push with me, it was okay for me to just focus a lot on my consulting to stay relevant. But I always felt the need that how do you stay up to date, right? How do you force that? And that's always been a big question of mine. And I think this is how I do it. And I don't feel like sitting down and saying questions. It's like, this is a cool area and nobody's writing about it. I got into audio branding. I worked on a campaign where the owner of the agency said, let's do an audionomic. Let's use sound. And the big media buy was radio. It was for a package good, a grocery store item. And people tend to shop on the weekends. So we bought radio on Thursday evenings and Thursdays. And our our main competitor, bought TV. And whenever the TV would run, they would accredit it to us. Oh, yeah, I heard that radio spot, or I heard that. And they talked about our TV spots. We never did TV. What we did was a radio spot, and at the end of it, there was a sound. It was for pickles, and the brand what we discovered was this brand tends to get eaten up, unlike most brands of pickles that start in the front of your fridge. You eat a few of them, and then a little bit, you have some more, and eventually it makes it to the back of the fridge, and it sits there until they get soggy and old, and then you throw them out, and then you buy it again, and you go through the process. And so we called our brand the emptiest jar in the house. So at the end of every radio spot, we had a glass jar with a fork that went into it. And it became an audionomic that people remembered and responded to. And that was my first exposure to audio branding. And so I thought I knew about audio branding when I went to Colleen and Fahey, my co-author for the book, and said, "Hey, let's do something on this. Let's talk about audio branding." And it was a big eye-opening learning experience about how brands today need a whole audio language. It's not a jingle at the end of a commercial. It's jingles don't even work necessarily. They can. There are some jingles that become audio brands itself, but it's the sound of your computer opening up and starting. It's the roar of the engine of the Harley Davidson. It's the pop of the lid of the jar. All
Or of the coffee, all of those things which evoke sense memory.
exactly. And so I'm not a musician. I barely know how to hit play on a, streaming service, but I've always liked music and how it responds. And we are we're a visual society, but audio is more powerful. It's a defense mechanism. You hear things before you see things. You're out in the savannah and you hear a twig break. You got to run because who knows, you're going to be eaten in a minute. And so it was, and I learned all about it. We did an article for Harvard Business Review, and then we went and wrote this book.
That's a great example, and you layered something in there that bears repeating. It's not just a good question, it's gotta be a question that excites you, and as I say many, many times, your audience will never be more interested in your topic than you are, and so the journey of doing the research to write an article, let alone the research to write a book, is a long, arduous one, and if you can't sustain interest, you're gonna hate it the whole way, and it's gonna show up in the final manuscript and the published book. So I love this idea of this ongoing curiosity because the world is wide and wonderful. And if you're like me, I have more questions and curiosity than I have time, even if I was to live to 150.
Yeah, I've talked to some people, they want to write a book and self-publish it and put it up on Amazon and watch the money come in, and that's not how it works. Because I got to tell you, even self-published books, the money doesn't just come in.
There are no rainbows and unicorns.
No.
However, there are things that can happen and revenue and opportunities, like you talked about when you pulled out the book at your interview. Doors can't open because of a book, but it's not, you're going to make millions on royalties.
Yeah, you got to look at the total package. What is your objective? And then maybe your thought leadership can come from that. I don't if that's your ilk to do it that way, that's another way of going at it. But look at the total package. I will never make back the money. I guess I have made back the money on my books because I don't spend a lot researching them. It's not that expensive. But when you're doing the whole total package, you might not. In addition to, since I'm in advertising and do advertising and social media, and traditional and social and digital and all that, I've am helping authors launch their books and help some authors launch books that became bestsellers. And they're never going to make back on the royalties what they paid me. They're never going to make back on the royalties what they paid their PR firm. But they will make it back. What is your objective? Their objective was consulting and other, there's different objectives that you want. And if the if you're able to achieve those, then you earn back the money. It's an investment that pays in many ways besides the royalty check I get twice a year, or checks because I have multiple publishers. Twice a year, that's about enough to take my wife to dinner. And each each time, it's a nice dinner, but still,
It's a
um,
dinner. Yeah.
the dinner. It's not my rent.
And this goes to some of the findings that we have in the nonfiction author ROI study. Two specifically coming to mind that those who have a clear strategy before they write their book have an easier time and more effective time writing their book. They generate more impact, they generate more leads and opportunities than their peers who don't have a strategy in place. And then, secondly, people who have a clear strategy generate higher hard ROI in terms of financial impact, but it's not the dollars that come from royalty and translation. And so what you described experientially is also supported by the data.
Huh.
And a number of authors who have said, hey, there's a hard way to do this and there's a smart way to do this, right? Because writing a book is not easy. And certainly you can use a template, like you said, that you fell into, but that only takes some of the effort out. It's still a lot of work.
Yeah, as I said in college, I like writing fiction, and in many ways, I try to structure the books with a story arc, even if it's not an arc, it's a B2B book. There has to be some factor that, how they have the suspense at the end of a chapter to drive you to the
Mhm.
next chapter. You still got to weave that kind of stuff in. And that's actually part of the joy of writing is figuring that stuff out. It's becomes part of the fun of the puzzle. But it does all need to come together like that. But as you said, you need to know what is your objective? What is your strategy? And that will determine whether you go as a self-published, whether you go as a co-published, whether you go with a, conventional publisher. I, as an academic, have to go with a conventional publisher. I actually go to a conventional publishers that also blind peer review the manuscript, so it's a much higher level. But then at the same time, I have a higher level of authority when it gets published
Oh,
among more discerning readers. So, in my library, it helps with my library distribution and stuff like that as well. And you never know where somebody's going to come across your book.
so, Lawrence, as we begin to wrap up, I have a few lightning round questions,
Okay.
if you will. The first one is you've talked about the moments of change, getting the pitch accepted for your first book, pulling it out at the interview, and the interviewers for academia said, oh, you've written a book. When can you start? Or the book on AI and advertising that came out within months of ChatGPT, right? How much of this would you attribute to luck and how much to strategy?
Well, the first one was I don't want to say dumb luck, but it's a little both. Like we targeted the number one publisher of advertising books of its at its time with the concept. So they knew what was available in the category. They got it. And we had credibility for that. And they ran a full page ad in Ad Age back then when people read in actual printed magazines. And I think I'm sure when I came into Columbia, I can't be 100% sure, but there's a good chance that they saw that ad promoting the book. So, again, that was finding the right publisher more so. So that was a little bit of strategy, but it's also luck. You never know when the editor is going to read the pitch. It could be on a bad day and everything sucks. Or it could be on a good day. One of the good things about blind peer review is generally there's a lower bar where they would send it out. So it's not just their view, it's three other people's views. And you don't need all three. You don't need 100%. And sometimes the editor could say, we really like this. And if everyone rejected it, but it's a little both.
The next question I want to ask you and give you a magic wand, if you will, that I want you to look 3, 5 years into the future. What would you use that magic wand to accomplish in terms of a goal or an objective? So, what challenge is it that you're trying to solve that you would want to clear out of the way to make greater impact?
I'd love everyone to automatically look for my books, you know? It's the awareness of the next topic because they do build, but they're sort of in different niche areas. But it's really and the time to write the books. Those would be the 2 things I'd want.
Fantastic. Lawrence, I want to thank you for joining us today on Leveraging Thought Leadership. It's been a delightful conversation talking about your practice of thought leadership as well as your journey.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversations.
Okay, you've made it to the end of the episode. And that means you're probably someone deeply interested in thought leadership. Want to learn even more? Here are 3 recommendations. First, check out the back catalog of our podcast episodes. There are a lot of great conversations with people at the top of their game in thought leadership, as well as just starting out. Second, subscribe to our newsletter that talks about the business of thought leadership. And finally, feel free to reach out to me. My day job is helping people with big insights take them to scale through the practice of thought leadership. Maybe you're looking for strategy, or maybe you want to polish up your ideas, or even create new products and offerings. I'd love to chat with you. Thanks for listening.